Extraordinary Life Stories is proudly sponsored by the Georgia Emerson Centre.
On this episode of Extraordinary Lives, I'm talking to Alastair Campbell. Alastair is a journalist, author, strategist, broadcaster and host of the popular podcast, The Rest is Politics. Alastair became a household name for his political roles during Tony Blair's leadership of the Labour Party. In May this year, he published his 18th book, But What Can I Do? A call to arms to people to get more engaged in politics. His book went straight to #1 in the Sunday Times bestseller list in the first week of publication, meaning that at that time, Alastair had both the #1 podcast and best-selling non-fiction hardback book in the UK. I can't think of anyone so closely related to UK politics that I would look forward to talking with as much as Alastair. This is undoubtedly for me down to his authenticity and how open and articulate he is about himself, particularly his mental health and his journey and what he's doing as a mental health advocate, making him so relatable. Authentic and relatable, words I simply cannot imagine using in a sentence about any other politician. I'm really looking forward to talking with Alastair. Alastair, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell me, who is Alastair Campbell?
Well, there's lots of us. It's quite a common name.
The one sitting here.
Okay. I mean, look, I'll go to what it says on my website.
Yeah.
Writer, communicator, strategist. So I suppose that's how I see myself professionally. Personally, I think like all of us, I'm a very complicated, quite driven, quite obsessive, driven by things I really believe.
Yeah.
And people I really care about. That's about it, really.
Yeah. As well as being a dad,
well,
husband.
That's people I care about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think I've definitely... Yeah, I think the older I've got, the more I've realised that's probably what motivates me as much as anything. But I wonder whether some of that is because in my previous life, particularly when the kids were growing up, I wasn't maybe there as much as I feel I should have been. And it's, it's a bit late when they're into their 30s.
Yeah, I can get that. Well, I'm in the trenches, 12 and 13-year-old daughters. I was going to ask you that because at times with your life, and it's so multifaceted, right? How have you managed to juggle? How have you kept that kind of, being yourself and time for yourself, husband, father? Are there times when that's been out of kilter?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, if I look back over, when I was transcribing my diaries, after I left number 10, there were two things I realised. One was, I don't think I'd quite been conscious how often I was actually depressed. And the second was, I don't quite know how Fiona put up with it, looking back. Now, lots of people have really busy lives, and lots of people have pressure, and lots of people have jobs that feel like they're very, very kind of, all-consuming. Lots of people. But I think the difference is that I had that allied to a personality that was never off, so, and I think that's quite difficult to live with, and you're not conscious of it in the way maybe you should be. So yeah, I think if Fiona wasn't as strong as she is and as principled and driven in a different way by the things that she believes, I think it would have been touch and go. Yeah.
And it feels to me like the journey you've been on, where at a certain point a foot came off the gas, you got some time, you got some perspective, to then actually not just spend time yourself, but be really open about your own mental health. And you mentioned depression. What was the catalyst for that?
Again, it's quite complicated, I think. I think a lot of it was driven by my brother who had schizophrenia. I always wanted to campaign on mental health. And then I had my own experiences of depression. I had one episode of psychosis. Right. I had issues with drink. And I think what was happening is when I was working in frontline politics, working with Tony Blair, working in Downing Street, full on, I didn't feel it was my place to have my own agenda, as it were. But percolating away the whole time was, I think when I'm out of here, I'm not saying I was thinking this at the time, but I think this is what was percolating. When I'm out of here, I'm going to really get stuck into this mental health agenda. But then it was accidental, to be absolutely frank. I mean, the charities got in touch with me. They knew that I talked about my own stuff and my own history, so they got in touch with me, wanted me to kind of do stuff. And I was very resistant at the start because I was involved in a blood cancer charity, and I try and be strategic about that stuff, focus, deliver. But bit by bit, I did realise, I felt that a lot of the strengths that I had as the way I think, the way I campaign, I think they lent themselves to this mental health agenda. But then something really quite odd happened, is that I, out of the blue, had this idea for a novel called All in the Mind, and I was by that time seeing a psychiatrist very regularly, because I'd realised that once I got out of Downing Street, the depressions that I'd probably been dealing with in a previous life through drink, then through work, just keeping going, they kept coming. So there's me thinking, I've left the job, I'm under less pressure, but the depressions, if anything, were getting worse. So I started to see somebody, and really quite intense for quite a while. And I was out on my bike one day, not far from here, up at the crematorium in Golders Green. And I was cycling by this crematorium, and there was a huge crowd outside, right? And I didn't stop, but I just decided that was the last scene in this novel I'm going to write, which I hadn't even had the idea for. And I then decided that was the funeral of a psychiatrist, and those hundreds of people were his patients who he'd helped, and his family didn't know anything about them. That was the initial thought. And then I just sort of got into it, and then I thought, this is, and then I finished it before I told anybody I was doing it. I didn't even tell Fiona I was writing it. It was like something that was just pouring out of me. And I sent it off to a publisher, and they really liked it. And then I thought, well, this could really make a bit of an impact. So then I decided to make a documentary about my own breakdown. And it's all really just sort of snowballed from that. Yeah. And then things like Jack that you know about come along, Just Ask a Question, and I get involved in that. I get involved with Rethink, with Mind, with Maytree, Suicide Sanctuary. You just get involved with these different organisations. And, how I see my role within it all is trying to move the dial on the debate. And I think we're having some success on that. Where I think we're less successful is persuading this bloody government that it actually matters.
I was going to ask you that, because it does feel like, even just us having this conversation, you mentioned Jack, we're filming in the Jack Just Ask a Question studio now. Yeah. And clearly, you filmed on that, people can ask you questions from a lived experience point of view. But the government, it does feel like there's kind of a left hand, right hand, and the lack of consistency. I don't know when you felt a previous government, whichever one you choose, made the most progress. But right now, it's just clearly not a priority. And on the back of COVID, and on the back of interest rates, so many stressful situations, mental health really should be a priority, right?
Well, I think that the Labour government, did make progress. I wish we could have done more? Definitely. We definitely made massive progress on the health service as a whole, and within that on mental health. I think what's happened since then, so for example, David Cameron came in, and Nick Clegg, to be fair, he really was serious about trying to get mental health up the agenda. He got the funding for Time to Change campaign, which was important. Cameron said it was a priority. Theresa May said it was a priority, but of course didn't last. And then since then, it's almost like it's just frittered away.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
And I think what it is that they just underestimate. They underestimate how much better a country would be, would be, and over time how much money we would save if we invested in kids' mental health, their well-being, their welfare, genuinely looking after what goes on inside their heads.
Yeah, because companies are investing
totally
in mental health in a massive way. So if you look at a political...
Partly because I've been amazed how many of the You know, the banks get a very bad reputation for all sorts of justified reasons. But I've noticed how many of them are really kind of getting stuck in on this. And part of it's, you know, because they want happier, healthier people working there. But the other reason is most of them had suicides during the crash. And that just opened their eyes up to the pressure that they were putting people under. And then the cost, not just the human cost, but for them, the financial cost. You get some big trader decides to jump off a building, you know, they've got to go and find another one. They've got to pay him a lot of money as well, or her a lot of money. So I think that changed things. But for the government, I mean, they don't even, at least Cameron and May talked the talk. This lot don't even talk it.
No.
You know,
they won't give them the chance to see it through.
Extraordinary Life Stories is proudly sponsored by the Georgia Emerson Centre. Introducing the Georgia Emerson Centre, where innovation meets health. If you are tired of waiting for a diagnosis or believe there should be other ways to treat your condition, the Georgia Emerson Centre could help you. We take a patient-first approach and offer the latest medications and technological advancements in private healthcare across a number of key areas, including but not limited to headaches, migraines and chronic pain, mental health conditions, addiction and ADHD diagnosis and treatment. We have an on-site lab for diagnostics to enable you to receive health assessments on your terms and in your timelines. From our state-of-the-art clinic in central London, our consultants want to help you improve your quality of life and access to affordable healthcare services. Take back control of your health at the Georgia Emerson Centre. Extraordinary Life Stories is proudly sponsored by the Georgia Emerson Centre.
It feels like when, you know, someone new in power comes in, the roles that are given out don't necessarily suit the skills, the CV to the people that are giving it, which is probably where I struggle with politics in general. And actually, not being deliberately flattering, but where I think you are so relatable and authentic, because you speak your mind rather than, oh, will that sound right, or will that win any votes? That's what we're up against, right? We're up against...
partly, but you know, I mean, I'm not an elected politician, never was. I actually do think a lot of politicians could benefit from understanding. You see, I often get politicians saying to me, but you're the guy who made us do all that stuff, you know, message, discipline, etc. And I will say, yeah, but what I never said was speak like a robot. What I never said was just say the same thing a million times. Delivering the same message is not the same. I'm talking to you now, I'm saying things I've said for years, okay? You've got to keep saying them, and you've got to keep saying them because you believe them and they're coming from a place of real conviction. I think too many politicians, they think it's about the kind of clever communication, but far more important is where they're coming from. What's the conviction? Where's the heart? I just listened on the way in, I listened to this interview with an education minister about crumbling schools, right? I mean, I just thought, you know, nobody's listening to you.
No.
You're going to talk like that, nobody's listening.
No, and I think that scares me. I mentioned already, 12 and 13-year-old daughters growing up, and there's no education about mental health at all. It's an archaic system. Well, it doesn't seem to be. They've got different divisions set up, but when you talk to the kids, and obviously there's parents in our school, we're talking all the time, and the things that we really have available if we choose to learn as adults, they're not being made available at school age for the children to actually understand it's right to talk and to be more sharing rather than bottling things up.
I feel maybe it's because the schools that ask me to go in and talk about this, they're already on it. But I feel that generation is naturally much more inclined towards being open. But I think you've got to be very sympathetic to the teachers and the head teachers, because they are. I read this incredible piece in the Financial Times yesterday about a school up in Oldham. And the journalist who wrote it, Jennifer Williams, she talked about this sort of parallel universe between the world of politicians talking about how great they are, most of the media covering a parallel universe. This school was like real problems in these kids' lives, real problems, and the teachers were having to fix them. Not teach, but kind of, they are teaching, they're doing their best, but like fixing whether that kid's getting fed, fixing whether that kid is actually living in somewhere that's habitable, you know?
Wow.
And I think that's, so the mental health agenda is part of that, without a doubt. One thing I really hope Labour do if they get into power, we had, do you remember we had the whole classroom assistant thing? You had the teacher doing the job and they were teaching, the classroom assistant was helping and supporting, what have you. I think that kind of role with a specific focus on, you don't have to call it mental health, but you know, how kids are feeling.
Yeah.
Whether kids are motivated, whether kids are well fed, because that's so important to mental well-being as well. So, and I think that we're, you know, a decade of austerity, I think, has so reduced the public realm, as it were, and our understanding of what it is, and the support kids need. Because the thing I get, you know, I often get asked, you know, what gives you the book you mentioned, my last book, you know, what can I do? The first half, I'm sure you agree, is incredibly depressing about the state of the world. So then people say, well, what gives you hope? What does give me hope is actually the fact, I find, contrary to what you said, that when I go into schools, kids are incredibly open, are up for it, talking about this stuff. My worry is that the awareness, we've moved the dial on awareness, so people feel they can be more open, but then when they try and get the support and the help they need, it's not there. No. That's the problem.
No. There's a lot of talk, there's no follow-up and action, which, you know, is the bit that I'm struggling with.
Well, listen, there's not even the talk in government at the moment. No. There's not even the talk. Right, I follow this stuff very, very closely. I know who the health secretary is. I don't know who's in charge of mental health.
That's terrifying.
I don't.
Yeah.
I remember Theresa May appointed, it was a big deal at the time, she appointed the first ever Minister of Suicide Prevention.
Yeah.
Jackie something Price, Doyle Price, I think her name was. If you Google her now and you put in news, I bet you the most covered thing will be the appointment. What's she done? What's been done?
Yeah, that's the point. It's frustrating to witness. I think I'd love to know from your point of view, if you were a strategist now in power, what would you do? Have you given that some thought? Because you know the whole. But what can I do? And the success of the book, it's so relatable. I think for me, I'm 45. So as a youngster, I didn't show an interest in politics because it just felt so unrelatable and so just, you know, disingenuous. You know, just wasn't, you know, people weren't following through what they were saying and so on. Whereas you've written a book that is on the back of people actually reaching out to you, and particularly with the success of your podcast, Arrested Politics. So why do you think so many people are coming to you and asking that, you know, on the basis of the relatability?
Look, I'm sure they are going to all sorts of different people in different places, but I guess with me it's a combination of having had quite a lot of experience, both of the media world and of politics.
Sure.
And the fact that, I mean, you know, as you know, in the book I invent this word perseverance. I kind of just keep going with it. I keep going with it, and I keep trying to just keep pushing on it, keep trying to get, I say I'm actually writing another book now, which is going to be for an even younger audience.
I wondered that.
Primary schools.
Yeah.
Just explaining what politics is. I mean, one of the problems you talked about, you know, you don't get taught about mental health in schools. Well, a real problem in our political system, kids don't get taught about politics unless they choose to do politics later in their schools.
That's very true.
Right, they don't learn about politics.
No.
And then we wonder why we have a country that says, oh, I don't understand politics, I don't care about politics, when it has so much of an impact on their lives. Mm-hmm. So I think, and also you mentioned the podcast, I think that has been interesting in terms of, it's been almost accidental. Certainly the success has been unexpected. You know, two kind of, I'm 66, he's 50, sitting around talking, two white men talking about politics. And yet when we did a live podcast event at the Albert Hall, over a third of the audience were under 30.
Yeah, that's the bit that I find fascinating, is you've managed to get that blend of old and young, all related to you, which is a skill. And I think actually something I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the word success of the podcast, success of the book. It went straight to number one in the Sunday Times upon being released. What is your definition of success?
I mean, it depends what you're doing, isn't it? It's funny, I was determined for that book to get to number one. I've written 18 books now, or 19, and I think I've had 3 that went straight to number one, and they're the 3 that I wanted to. So that probably means I really worked at it. The first was the first volume of Diaries, The Blair Years. The second was Winners. I thought there's no way I can write a book called Winners that doesn't get to number one.
Absolutely.
So that happened, and then the third was this one. So that was a success.
Sure.
In that I set that objective to try to do that. Would it have been the end of the world if I hadn't have achieved that? No. But I think, so success for me, it's about, I don't know, I like to do everything I do to the best of my ability. I'm very hard on myself. I work hard at what I do. But I think ultimately it's a bit like happiness. I don't see happiness about having a good time in the moment. I see happiness and success as things that you build over time. So like, for example, in politics, you know, we were very successful in that we won 3 general elections and I think did a lot of good change for the country, okay? But the fact that since Gordon Brown was ousted by Cameron in 2010, that Labour has been nowhere near getting back up until now, feels like a failure for which I kind of sit there, I don't sit there thinking, oh, weren't we amazing, we won 3 elections. I'm very proud of that. Sure. But I actually think, you know, we must have done something wrong for this to have been reversed so quickly. So it's ongoing. It's never, it's not like, I was talking to Anthony Joshua for an interview yesterday, the boxer, and you know, we were talking about, we were saying, would you like to be incomplete if you didn't have this fight or that fight or win the world title again? And he was kind of, a bit like me, he was kind of not sure about how to answer it, because in terms of fighting his next fight, he'll fight it like his life depends on it. But if he loses, he keeps going. Life goes on. Life goes on. Yeah. So you're still building. Yeah. So maybe your definition of success changes.
Yeah, exactly. And if I asked you the question when you were just pumped and primed in working with Tony Blair and so on, would your answer have been totally different? So it's interesting.
Yeah. No, if you'd have asked me a week before the 97 election, I'd have said, what a stupid question. You know? Success means winning this election and winning it big and then doing lots of stuff.
Yeah. Use the title of your book, but what can I do? What can people do?
Well, it's hard because ultimately we can all, you know, there's a lot we can do to look after ourselves. That's the first thing.
Sure.
So I look at you and I can see you're very physically fit, right? That is very good for your mental health.
Sure.
So you're doing something that is good for your mental health. I think we can do a lot more to help each other. We shouldn't necessarily have to, but I think that because there is this lack of services, I think we should be thinking about what we can do for each other. I do think business is filling the gap to some extent. Not fully, but to some extent. But in terms of what a government can do, ultimately, I mean, I don't know whether they know this, all these politicians who keep saying this is a priority, that's a priority. Priority means more important than other things. So if it's going to be a priority, make it a priority. Don't just say it, make it a priority. And then that has to translate into change. So we have to campaign for change. Right. And I think the campaigning has been very effective in terms of changing the debate, changing the dialogue, making people feel more comfortable about being more open. The danger with that has been that it's opened the door to, if you like, for the demand for more services at a time when they're being shrunk. And I think the other thing is we've got to, you talked about strategy, what a strategy would be. A strategy in mental health for me would be to say, let's stop thinking about mental health as the need for a mental illness service, which is what we have now, and have a mental health service. In other words, care for the mental health and well-being of people.
Absolutely.
To stop them getting ill, so a more preventative approach. And I think over time that will lead to social dividend, financial dividend, personal, family dividend, etc. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Sure Start. I think one of the best things we did as a government was Sure Start, helping families, bringing up kids in particularly in deprived areas, giving them some very, very basic support. This government comes along, get rid. Another thing, the police, you know, justifiably at times they get a bad reputation, but the police, I think, they've sort of morphed because of austerity and because of the government not seeing mental health as a priority. They've morphed into being the front line of a lot of mental health care. And now you have a situation where the Metropolitan Police Commander comes along and says, we cannot do this anymore because it's taking us away from what our job is meant to be. Well, that is a failure of our health services and of our police. And that is down, I'm afraid, you can complain all you want about managers, about doctors, about police officers. Ultimately, that is down to a government not having that as its priority.
Yeah.
So without being too political, vote Labour.
You've articulated that
Get rid of
really well.
Yeah.
There's so many things you have done. What have you not done that's sort of in the diary on the back page or in there that you must do? You know, there's something that you've lined up that you want to achieve.
There's nothing that I feel I must do. There's lots of things I feel I will do. The one thing I think I should have done, which I haven't done, and which a lot of people would still say to me I should do, is stand for election myself. And there's lots and lots of reasons why I haven't, mainly to do with timing, and what I was doing at the time, and now to do with just feeling that I just think it feels so much like going back.
From my perspective, I would love you to, because you're a different person.
Yeah.
The world is a different place. And we talked about it already from a relatability point of view, from an authentic point of view. I mean, how many other politicians could you use those two words in a sentence with, in being genuine, right? And yet actually...
You could. I can tell you a few, but not the ones...
Well, you know a lot more than me.
Yeah, for sure.
But, so I think that's the point. My perspective, I read a lot. You know, I talk to a lot of people. I'm in different businesses. That's not the impression I get of other places. And actually, there might be some good ones out there. But to get to the age of 45 and not having really seen anyone that I've really... That's half the challenge, I think, for people. Yeah. It's just like, who's going to see something through? Who can I believe in? Who can I get behind? So I'm not trying to make that any stronger ink in your book. But
all you're going to do is make you feel guilty, right? So don't do that.
Too late.
It does make me feel guilty. It really does.
There are so many more things I'd love to talk to you about, but we've run out of time. But I've really enjoyed talking to you, Alastair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Extraordinary Life Stories is proudly sponsored by the Georgia Emerson Centre. Introducing the Georgia Emerson Centre, where innovation meets health. If you are tired of waiting for a diagnosis or believe there should be other ways to treat your condition, the Georgia Emerson Centre could help you. We take a patient-first approach and offer the latest medications and technological advancements in private healthcare across a number of key areas, including but not limited to headaches, migraines and chronic pain, mental health conditions, addiction and ADHD diagnosis and treatment. We have an on-site lab for diagnostics to enable you to receive health assessments on your terms and in your timelines. From our state-of-the-art clinic in central London, our consultants want to help you improve your quality of life and access to affordable healthcare services. Take back control of your health at the Georgia Emerson Centre.